Good evening, everyone. This is another episode of the California Proprietarian Podcast, otherwise known as CAPropCast for short, where we tackle issues on a daily basis that threaten private property rights in this country. Our property rights come from God, and so we like to do everything we can to defend those from the ravages of the state and its allies and whatever else might threaten them. We like to deal with a different issue in every installment that potentially has implications for that. And today we will be focusing on the phenomenon of no-knock warrants, no-knock raids, and how it pertains to the overall trends of the militarization of domestic law enforcement in this country, and the implications that those trends have for the exercise of individual rights as guaranteed in the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And to discuss these very relevant and pressing issues, I brought on a highly esteemed and brilliant and knowledgeable individual named Daniel Edmondson. Just to give a little background on him, him and I met when we were both in the United States Navy. We were stationed at the Naval Nuclear Power Training Command in Charleston, South Carolina together. He's a brilliant and very well-read individual, very well-rounded, and that's why I brought him on. He's very skeptical of the police state in general, which is an attribute I very much admire in him. And with that, I'd like to turn this over to him for a moment to introduce himself, and then we'll dive into the meat of this topic.
Howdy, this is Daniel from Tennessee. If you'll forgive the loud music, I'm in a biker bar now, but that's okay. There is no better safe haven for liberty than the biker bars of America.
That is a fact. It's a very well-chosen place, and I think you'll find a lot of people in there that associate American freedom with the feeling of cruising down the highway with the wind whipping through their hair, which there's not a whole lot of things more American than that, if you ask me.
I should like to see the place turned into an election precinct.
An election precinct, yes. We need every election precinct to more or less be like that. I couldn't agree more. But with that, I'd like to delve into the meat of our topic today. So, Daniel, a lot of times when you and I talk to each other, the issue of no-knock warrants frequently comes up because both of us are very, very pro gun rights. We definitely worry about the implications that state tyranny has for our guns and for the rights of gun owners in general, as guaranteed by the Bill of Rights to the U.S. Constitution. And we have a lot of concerns about due process. And no-knock raids intimately affect all of that. I think we can both agree. So I'd like to start off by giving a quick introduction of how no-knock raids came to the national consciousness in this country, how it came to be part of the discourse. And I'd like to kick that off with a discussion about the beginning of the war on drugs, which I believe was first declared by President Richard Nixon and was accelerated during the presidency of Ronald Reagan, because in the 1980s, that's when we start to see a sharp uptick up until the present in both militarization of police and the use of no-knock raids, which are disproportionately used against people suspected of relatively nonviolent drug possession and drug distribution offenses, often only for marijuana. So, given that introduction, Daniel, if you will, I'd like you to go into your thoughts as to the constitutional issues raised by the use of no-knock raids against people who are very often not likely to be violent offenders.
Well, sure. So, like you said, the no-knock raids really started to proliferate in this country with the war on drugs, beginning in the countercultural era of the late '60s and early '70s, and accelerating rapidly during the Reagan era of the '80s. Had it not been for the war on drugs, it's unlikely that many of us would have ever heard of such a thing as a no-knock raid, except in perhaps a few action movies. In a free society such as the United States, it's not hard to avoid the police for the everyday average working class American. You can more or less go through your life and expect that if you live honestly, you'll never be arrested, you'll never go to jail. That only happens to bad guys, right? But the war on drugs changed all of that because in the war on drugs, everybody's guilty basically, because let's not be hypocrites here. Who hasn't smoked a little pot? Come on,
Of course.
okay.
Absolutely.
Come on, I know. I know fundamentalist Christian preachers who say that in their youth they took a little too literally the passages in Genesis about the plants being created for man's use and happiness. So basically, everybody's guilty. Everybody's guilty, and everybody's a hypocrite. Because of course the vast majority of people who use never face any consequences for it. So prosecutions are only selective at best. Look at the of the four of the past. Well, let's see. There's Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden. Well, of those five U.S. presidents, Clinton, Bush, and Obama were admitted drug users. That's a fact. Trump, was a little too straight laced for that.
He's actually
You
a
know,
teetotaler in his personal life, as
yeah,
I understand it.
yeah. Trump's a little too straight laced for that. And Biden, he's crazy enough without any without being under the influence of anything.
Yeah, he's got
Uh,
Alzheimer's.
so you have people people of all stripes, of all um, sectors of society using drugs illicitly, and only a very small percentage of them ever actually being prosecuted to the full extent of the law. And um, it creates a situation where anybody can potentially, not probably, but potentially be ensnared in the criminal justice system. And so anybody could potentially be on the receiving end of a no-knock warrant. And it has fundamentally altered the relationship that the average American has with the police department. Now, you look at the old Norman Rockwell painting of the policeman sitting at a lunch counter with the little boy, the little runaway, and drinking a milkshake with him. Peering suspiciously over his glasses. That's not the reality anymore. The average American has become deeply, deeply distrustful of the police in a way that is very unhealthy for a liberal democracy. I mean a liberal democracy in the sense that Philip would use the term.
Oh, yeah, yes, of course. Now, the follow-up question to that, I suppose, is definitely the war on drugs is what originally gave rise to this excessive militarization of police and specifically the use of no-knock warrants. But since 2001, with the advent of the so-called war on terror, which has been just as useless and just as much of a tyrannical fraud, I think, as the war on drugs, if not even more so. Do you think that the war on terror has substantially contributed to the horrors associated with the excessive use of no-knock raids in this country, and by default also with the relationship that, as you pointed out, that the average American citizen now has with law enforcement?
It had not for the average American. The average American, probably really does not have nothing to hide on his emails. The average American, probably will not ever come into contact with federal law enforcement. Except maybe except maybe once a year on April 15th.
Yes, yes, of course.
The trouble with the war on drugs is it really it makes it makes tyranny in your face in a way that that really very few other things the government's ever done.
And this is, of course,
it it makes the issue, not just something in the abstract, but something that's very real and concrete and in your face.
and
Not just for a few people, but for everybody.
And this is, of course, aggravated by the fact that, especially ever since the beginning of the War on Terror, as various pieces of military hardware that were used in Afghanistan and Iraq have slowly, over time, been decommissioned, they have often been transferred to various local police departments, especially urban metropolitan police departments around this country, via federal consent decrees. And so
Yeah,
I think
they have.
we're seeing local police departments driving around in MRAPs, and they have M82 Barrett anti-material sniper rifles. They're equipped with grenade launchers. They're very much equipped with weapons of war. Do you think that all of these trends are combining to turn, at least in the urban metropolitan areas, to turn law enforcement in this country into more of what is functionally a core of feudal retainers, rather than public servants in a constitutional republic?
Well, it's not just in urban metropolitan areas. It's in every small town nationwide, and I've seen it. It's and yes, the hardware that police are equipped with now, because of sort of lend-lease agreements, for lack of a better word, that they have with the Department of Homeland Security, is disproportionate to the task at hand, and it does create a sort of sense of alienation that a lot of people have with their police, and with authority in general. But it's not just the hardware; it's the mentality that they have. The mentality that a lot of police have is one of an occupation force.
Uh, do you think that that this has to do with the fact that in a lot of areas, amongst other problems, they're functionally acting as an organization that is there to extract revenue from the general populace via the issuing of tickets and citations and things of that nature that are overwhelmingly used, not necessarily to punish infractions and criminal activity properly, but are actually used just to generate an additional revenue for these departments to use, for training programs or for additional paramilitary gear, or benefits, so on and so forth.
There is certainly an economic dimension to it. I personally tend to drive very aggressively, and so I have over the years racked up a number of speeding tickets, but very few of them have actually gone against my driving license. It's never been suspended, because if you're wise, you can kind of play the system. What they want you to do. What they want you to do is just plead guilty and pay it. Get it out of your hair, and just pay them to leave you alone. Well, of course you can do that, but if you put up, if you put up at least a little bit of resistance, if you say, "Hey, I'm pleading not guilty. I'm taking this to court," you can very quickly bring the judge to the negotiating table, and I know this from personal experience, and say, "Hey, look, all you want is the money. All I want is to, make this problem go away. I don't want this on my driving record. Let's make a mutually agreeable deal here," and you'll be surprised how quickly that can be done. So absolutely, there are speed traps. A lot of small towns, in particular, that don't have a lot going for them economically, have become notorious as speed traps.
That's not surprising, especially because in a lot of those small towns, they probably wouldn't be benefiting very much from federal grants via consent decrees. And now,
Well, and the speed traps, they serve a sort of dual purpose. They not only do they serve as a source of revenue for speeding tickets, but they also serve as a tremendous opportunity for as a pretext for search warrants. The Supreme Court has ruled that searches which are incident to a lawful detainment or arrest are within the bounds of the Fourth Amendment. And so, very often when police make a major drug bust or something like that, it starts as nothing more than a simple traffic ticket. A broken tail light, or being 10 to 15 miles per hour of the speed limit.
now, I have to ask too, but before we dive into the next phase of this conversation, how do you think police unions, they're often notoriously corrupt. They exist to very often, just as all unions do, to defend employees who probably shouldn't be defended and probably have no business working in that profession. What impact do you think the corruption and the favoritism perpetuated by police unions has on this overall trend of militarization of police, and specifically on the application of no-knock warrants?
Well, I can't really speak on that directly. I live in a state where public sector unions are really not a major political force. Unions in general are not a major political force in here in Tennessee, let alone public sector unions, which do not have many of the legal protections that private sector unions enjoy. Um, I do occasionally see bumper stickers that say FOP, Fraternal Order of Police. I don't know, exactly how much political influence they wield down here. I do know that police unions have long, supported things like qualified immunity,
Yeah.
which keep police from being sued. Qualified immunity only is qualified civil immunity. It only applies to civil cases. That's my understanding. Any lawyers in the audience, I'm sure, will be happy to correct me. But as I understand it, and I'm not a lawyer, I don't profess or claim to be. As I understand it, qualified immunity does not apply to criminal charges. So when police overstep their bounds, they are liable to be criminally charged under federal civil rights laws. But for better or for worse, that rarely ever happens. Uh, Most of the time, when there's some major controversy about what the police did, uh, you know, um, excessive force or racial profiling or something um, it's the taxpayer who gets sued. The the police are largely protected by qualified immunity, and cities and counties and towns and local governments they will pony up fat stacks of cash to get the ambulance chasers out of their hair. They'll say, okay, well, we don't want to go to court, and you don't want to go to court. So we'll go. We'll just fleece the taxpayers for a few $1,000,000 and just pay you a settlement agreement. Okay, we win, you win. The only losers in the deal are the taxpayers.
True. True.
Right, and justice, of course.
It,
Uh,
it's a terrible system that's been rigged up right
right.
there.
So
And
so
and as far as the next phase and all this goes, we were discussing a specific case of the application of a no-knock warrant. I believe the gentleman in question, his name is Marvin Lewis Guy, if I'm not mistaken. And this case actually originated several years ago, back in 2017. And as is the case with many no-knock raids, this individual was suspected of having a significant quantity of illegal narcotics in his residence, and was subjected to a no-knock raid. And given the nature of no-knock raids and how the castle doctrine and the right to self-defense and the right to keep and bear arms works in this country, when his home was being forcibly entered without prior warning, he did in fact open fire and strike one of the deputies that was entering his home, and was hit with felony charges accordingly for I believe killing him. To your mind, uh, how do you think, given recent trends and how the courts are generally starting to rule more and more in favor of gun rights, and given trends such as the thank God the acquittal of people like Kyle Rittenhouse, for obviously defending himself, how do you think these recent pro gun rights and pro self defense findings by the courts are going to, in the coming few years, impact how situations are dealt with regard to people using deadly force to defend themselves in their homes when a no-knock raid occurs?
Well, forgive me. I'm not quite sure of the case to which you're referring. If it's the one, if it's the one we spoke about, was it the one in Texas, where it was a white defendant, so there was no race issue at play. But it wasn't like a case of racial profiling. But there was a man whose home was subject to a no-knock warrant, and he killed a sheriff's deputy in Texas. Was that the one?
Oh, we
Is that the one to which you're referring?
we did discuss that. Yes,
Yeah.
amongst several other cases.
And the case that I'm thinking of, if it's the one you're thinking of, the sheriff's department entered a home in Texas, and of course, Texas is very strongly a castle doctrine state. Um, the man in the home, but who knows what he was thinking at the time, but presumably he was he was quite startled, and assumed the worst, and in the ensuing chaos, shot and killed a sheriff's deputy. Tragically, I'm sure the surviving family of the sheriff's deputy are quite grief stricken, and that sort of thing never should have occurred. But as I understand, under the circumstances, the grand jury decided not to return the charges against him, because as they understood the facts of the case, he acted reasonably and prudently under the circumstances, given what he knew and believed at the time. If someone kicks in your door in the middle of the night or the wee hours of the morning, anything can happen. And so, especially in a state like Texas, which has a long history of individual self-defense, there's going to be some collateral damage for sure.
Now, isn't there a substantial likelihood? Sorry, isn't there a substantial likelihood that the fact that it's typically in this country, ever since around the 1920s, it's typically very difficult to legally defend oneself against a police officer? Isn't litigation over whether or not one lawfully used deadly force against officers executing a no-knock raid? Isn't such a claim likely to be complicated based on the fact that police officers are given this special, almost extra legal protection?
Well, that's a great question. That's a great question, Philip. So there is a precedent on the matter. The Supreme Court precedent is Bad Elk versus the United States.
Yes.
Now that precedent is well over 100 years old. It's from the 19th century, and it does deal specifically with an Indian reservation. So it has limited applicability to modern cases. But but in general, that's kind of a state by state question. In many states, there, as I understand it, there's really no right to resist an arrest, even if it is an unlawful or mistaken arrest. And so, resisting arrest is a crime. Period. You shouldn't do it. Again, I'm not qualified to give legal advice, but in general, it's a good idea to save that battle for the courtroom,
Right.
and
Practically speaking, yes.
not attempt to resist police in the moment. But again, like I said, in a no-knock raid late at night or in the wee hours of the morning, anything can happen, and jurors are instructed to judge the case based on the facts and circumstances at the time.
Right.
So, as my uncle used to always say, it seemed like a good idea at the time.
Right, and they have to judge it from the perspective of the defendant as best they can in the context of when the alleged original incident occurred. So that's certainly true. Just the only thing that worries me and disturbs me is that there is a history in this country of legal matters of use of force between citizens and police officers becoming very complicated. And one excellent example of that I'd like to review real quick is the obviously unlawful and grotesquely unconstitutional
The OK Corral?
Murder of Vicky Weaver at the hands of an FBI sniper named Lon Haruchi.
Right.
When the state of Idaho rightfully attempted to bring felony charges against Haruchi for that atrocity, they were prevented from doing so by sovereign immunity, not qualified immunity. So sovereign immunity is the counterpart that shields them from criminal charges in a number of cases. So I mean, do precedents like that worry you when it comes to attempts by people to resist what turns out to be a no-knock raid, but what they may have originally thought was just an ordinary criminal break-in?
Well, the issue there, as I understand it, was federal versus state authority and jurisdiction. In the Constitution, we have the supremacy clause, and despite the best attempts of nullificationists everywhere, the courts have always held that the states do not have any authority to obstruct the federal government in its business. So the issue was, could a federal agent acting in his official capacity be tried in state court? And the answer was no. I suppose in theory, Lon Horiuchi could have been charged in a federal court, but of course that never actually occurred.
Well, with an attorney general like Janet Reno, it's something like that is unlikely to occur, and that was a long time ago. Of course, that was a little over 30 years ago now. So, Lord willing, with more and more judges on the bench that were members of the Federalist Society, and with increasingly pro-gun rights rulings, we will end up with a situation where something like the really appalling state-sanctioned murder of Vicky Weaver and other members of the Weaver family will be met with justice, rather than with immunity from prosecution and from consequences for its perpetrators. But with that, Daniel, I'd like to thank you so much for being on today to discuss these relevant issues that potentially affect the lives of all liberty-loving and private property rights-loving Americans. And thank you so much for adding your elements of your practical experience and also from your copious readings to these discussions, and we look forward to speaking with you again in the future. And until then, we like to sign off by saying Sic Semper Tyrannis.
Sic Semper Tyrannis.
And God bless the volunteer state.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much, and God bless.